October 3, 1993, 15:32 hours, Mogadishu, Somalia, 8 MH-60. Black Hawk helicopters thundered low over the shattered capital, their rotor wash kicking up clouds of dust from streets lined with bullet-scarred buildings. Inside the lead aircraft, Chief Warrant Officer 3 Cliff Elvis Wolcott, 36 years old from Shreveport, Louisiana, maintained his position with the casual precision of a pilot who had flown this route 6 times before. His co-pilot, Chief Warrant Officer 2 Donovan Bull Briley, 33 from Tuscumbia, Alabama, scanned the target building below. Behind them, 4 fast ropes coiled and ready, sat 12 Army Rangers who would be on the ground in seconds. This was supposed to be simple, 30 minutes, maybe 45 at most. Fast rope into the target building, capture 2 of Mohamed Farrah Aidid's key lieutenants, load them into a ground convoy, and extract before the city's militia could organize a response. Task Force Ranger had executed 6 previous raids with textbook precision. The formula worked: speed, surprise, overwhelming force, immediate extraction. Get in, get the target, get out. The Rangers called it snatch and grab. The Delta Force operators, who would actually make the arrests, called it another day at the office. Major General William F. Garrison, 54, commander of Task Force Ranger, watched from the Joint Operations Center at Mogadishu Airport. A career Special Operations officer who had served in Vietnam and commanded Delta Force, Garrison had handpicked every element of this task force. He had 160 men preparing to conduct this raid. Delta Force operators for the arrest, Army Rangers for perimeter security, 161st Special Operations Aviation Regiment pilots flying the helicopters, and a ground convoy of trucks and Humvees for extraction. What none of them knew as Wolcott brought Super 61 into its hover position was that within 8 minutes, everything would go catastrophically wrong. By sunset, 18 Americans would be dead, 73 wounded, and 1 captured. The mission that was supposed to last 30 minutes would become a 15-hour nightmare that would change American foreign policy for a generation. The roots of this disaster stretched back 2 years to December 1991, when Somalia's government collapsed entirely. Mohamed Siad Barre, who had ruled Somalia as a dictator since 1969, fled the capital as clan-based militias tore the nation apart. What followed was not merely civil war, but the complete disintegration of any functioning state. Competing warlords divided the country, their militias fighting over territory, resources, and power. By 1992, the violence had created a humanitarian catastrophe. An estimated 300,000 Somalis died from starvation as warlords weaponized food aid, blocking deliveries to areas controlled by rivals. International relief organizations attempted to distribute food, but armed militias hijacked convoys, stole supplies, and sold them for weapons. The television images of skeletal children dying in the streets shocked the world. In December 1992, President George H.W. Bush authorized Operation Restore Hope, deploying 28,000 American troops to Somalia under United Nations authority. The mission was humanitarian: secure ports and roads, protect food distribution, create conditions for political reconciliation. Initially, the operation succeeded. Food reached people who were starving. The death rate plummeted. But humanitarian intervention became nation-building when the United Nations expanded the mission's mandate to include disarming militias and capturing warlords who threatened stability. Mohamed Farrah Aidid, a former general in Somalia's army who controlled southern Mogadishu, emerged as the primary threat. His militia, drawn from his Haba Gidar subclan of the Hawiye clan, numbered approximately 5,000 fighters. On June 5, 1993, Aidid's forces ambushed Pakistani peacekeepers inspecting weapons storage sites, killing 24 soldiers and mutilating some bodies. The United Nations Security Council passed Resolution 837, authorizing member states to take all necessary measures against those responsible. The mission changed from humanitarian relief to manhunt. The United States deployed Task Force Ranger to Mogadishu on August 26, 1993, with a singular purpose: capture Mohamed Farrah Aidid and his key lieutenants. Major General Garrison established his headquarters at Mogadishu Airport and began planning operations. The task force represented America's most elite military capabilities. Delta Force, officially known as 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta, provided the assault teams. These operators underwent the most rigorous selection and training in the U.S. military, spending years perfecting close quarters, combat, hostage rescue, and precision operations. 75 Delta operators deployed to Mogadishu. Company B, 3rd Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment provided security and blocking forces. The Rangers were younger, less experienced than Delta, but rigorously trained in air assault operations and urban combat. Approximately 130 Rangers deployed to Somalia. The 161st Special Operations Aviation Regiment, known as the Night Stalkers, provided aviation support. These pilots flew the most dangerous missions in the worst conditions, often at night with minimal support. Their motto was, "Night Stalkers don't quit." 16 MH-60 Blackhawks and 4 MH-6 Little Bird helicopters deployed to Mogadishu, along with their crews and support personnel. Between August 26th and October 3rd, Task Force Ranger conducted 6 successful raids, capturing numerous Aidid associates and militia leaders. Each operation followed the same pattern. Intelligence identifies a target location, Delta operators fast rope from helicopters, make the arrests within minutes. Ground convoy arrives, everyone loads up and departs. The longest operation had lasted 45 minutes. This consistent success bred confidence that bordered on complacency. The Somalis couldn't shoot down helicopters with any reliability. They couldn't coordinate effective resistance before Task Force Ranger extracted. They certainly couldn't trap American forces in a sustained engagement. On October 3rd, intelligence indicated that 2 of Aidid's key lieutenants, Omar Salad Elmi and Mohammed Hassan Awale, were meeting at a building near the Bakara market in south-central Mogadishu. This area was Aidid's stronghold, densely populated, fiercely hostile to Americans. Previous raids had targeted buildings in less populated areas. This would be Task Force Rangers' deepest penetration into enemy territory. Major General Garrison approved the mission that morning. The assault force would be larger than previous operations due to the target's location, deep in hostile territory. The plan called for 4 MH-6 Little Birds to orbit the target building, providing overwatch. 8 MH-60 Blackhawks would deliver the assault force, 4 carrying Delta operators who would make the arrests, 4 carrying Rangers who would secure the surrounding blocks. The ground convoy, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Danny McKnight, would include 9 Humvees and 3 5-ton trucks. The convoy would remain at the staging area until the assault teams had captured the targets, then drive to the target building, load everyone up, and extract. Expected duration, 30 minutes. At 15:32 hours on October 3rd, 1993, the operation began. The assault force gathered at the airport hangar, where they had staged for every previous raid. Staff Sergeant Matt Eversman, 26 years old from Fort Campbell, Kentucky, prepared to lead Chalk 4, a 12-man Ranger team that would fast rope from Super 67 and establish a blocking position 1 block north of the target building. This would be Eversman's first time leading a Chalk on an actual mission. His platoon leader was sick, so Eversman, normally the platoon sergeant, was stepping up. The Rangers checked their equipment with practiced efficiency. Each man carried an M16 rifle, approximately 300 rounds of ammunition, fragmentation grenades, smoke grenades, water, and a basic first aid kit. Body armor was optional, and many Rangers chose not to wear it in Somalia's 90-degree heat. They wore standard camouflage uniforms and Kevlar helmets. The Delta operators prepared with even more meticulous care. Master Sergeant Gary Gordon, 33, from Lincoln, Maine, and Sergeant First Class Randy Shugart, 35, from Newville, Pennsylvania, were sniper team members who would provide overwatch from circling helicopters. Both men were married with children. Both had served in special forces before joining Delta. Both were quiet professionals who had survived decades of dangerous operations by being better prepared and more skilled than everyone else. Gordon carried an M14 rifle, modified for accuracy at long range. Shugart carried a similar weapon. From helicopter positions hundreds of feet above the battle, they would engage threats to ground forces with precision fire. It was a role they had performed dozens of times. Chief Warrant Officer 3, Michael Durant, 32, from Berlin, New Hampshire, ran through his pre-flight checks on Super 64. Durant had been flying helicopters since 1985 and had joined the 161st in 1988. He was married to Laurie, had a young son named Joey, and had another child on the way. His co-pilot was Chief Warrant Officer 4, Raymond Frank, 45, from Clarksville, Tennessee, one of the most experienced pilots in the regiment. Durant loved flying. The MH-60 Black Hawk was a remarkable machine, powerful, agile, capable of operations in conditions that grounded other aircraft, but it was also vulnerable. The Black Hawk had been designed for the European theater, where American forces would have air superiority. In Mogadishu, every flight meant exposure to ground fire from thousands of militia fighters armed with AK-47s and RPG-7 rocket-propelled grenades. The RPG-7 was a Soviet-designed weapon that had been produced by the millions and distributed worldwide. Simple to operate, deadly effective against armored vehicles and helicopters, it consisted of a reusable launcher that fired rocket-propelled grenades with shaped charge warheads. The weapon's effective range against helicopters was approximately 200 meters, but a skilled operator could hit moving targets at greater distances. Somali militia fighters had learned to target helicopters by observing American patterns. The Black Hawks always circled counterclockwise around target buildings. They maintained relatively predictable altitudes and speeds, and critically, they had no defensive systems against RPGs. No chaff, no flares, no armor thick enough to stop a shaped charge warhead traveling at 300 meters per second. At 15:32 hours, the helicopters lifted off. The little birds went first, streaking low and fast toward the target. The Black Hawks followed, their door gunners scanning the streets below. The ground convoy rolled out of the airport compound, heading toward a staging area where they would wait for the call to move to the target building. The flight took 4 minutes. Wolcott brought Super 61 into position over the target building at 15:36 hours. Rangers began fast roping immediately, sliding down the thick ropes in seconds, hitting the ground with weapons ready. Delta operators followed, moving swiftly toward the building entrance. The Somalis below responded immediately. A K-47 fire crackled from windows and alleyways. RPG trails streaked upward toward the helicopters, but this was expected, manageable. The door gunners returned fire. The little birds engaged threats with their minigun pods. The Delta operators breached the building and began clearing rooms. By 15:40 hours, they had the targets in custody. Omar Salad Elmi and Mohamed Hassan Awale were flex-cuffed and ready for extraction. 24 prisoners total, more than intelligence had indicated would be present. Everything was proceeding according to plan. The ground convoy was called forward. Then, at 15:42 hours, a teenage Somali fighter on a rooftop 3 blocks south fired an RPG-7 at Super 61 as it circled the target building. The rocket-propelled grenade struck Super 61's tail rotor assembly at 15:42 hours and 30 seconds. The shaped charge warhead detonated on impact, sending a jet of superheated metal through the tail rotor gearbox. The effect was catastrophic and immediate. Chief Warrant Officer Cliff Wolcott felt the aircraft shudder, then begin spinning to the right. The tail rotor, essential for controlling the helicopter's yaw, had been destroyed. Without it, the main rotor's torque caused the entire aircraft to spin uncontrollably. Wolcott's hands moved through emergency procedures with the automatic precision of thousands of hours of flight time, but there was nothing to be done. Physics had taken control. "Going in hard, going down," Wolcott transmitted on the radio. His voice was calm, professional, betraying none of the terror that his passengers must have felt as the helicopter spun toward the Earth. Co-pilot Donovan Briley attempted to help manage the descent, but with no tail rotor authority, their options were non-existent. The Black Hawk spun faster as it fell, its main rotor still providing some lift, but unable to prevent the inevitable impact. The crew chiefs and door gunners in the cargo bay, Staff Sergeant Ray Dowdy and Staff Sergeant Charlie Warren, braced for impact. They had perhaps 3 seconds from the moment of the RPG strike until the helicopter hit the ground. Super 61 struck the street at approximately 15:42 hours and 45 seconds in a section of Mogadishu less than 3 blocks from the target building. The impact was violent. The helicopter's momentum drove it into the ground at an angle, the spinning fuselage slamming into the narrow street between 2-story buildings. The main rotor blades sheared off on impact, pieces of composite material flying in all directions. The tail boom separated from the fuselage. Chief Warrant Officer Cliff Wolcott died on impact. The forces involved in the crash were beyond what any human body could withstand. Chief Warrant Officer Donovan Briley also died instantly. In the cargo bay, the crew chiefs somehow survived the initial impact, though both were gravely injured. The radio transmission ended abruptly. In the Joint Operations Center, Major General Garrison heard Wolcott's last words, then silence. Within seconds, other helicopters confirmed what everyone feared. Super 61 was down. Black smoke rose from the crash site. The entire operational calculus changed in that instant. The mission was no longer a simple snatch and grab. American policy, doctrine, and culture were absolute on this point. No man would be left behind. Living or dead, every American would be recovered. The crash site had to be secured, the crew rescued or their bodies recovered, and the helicopter either extracted or destroyed to prevent sensitive equipment from falling into enemy hands. Garrison made the decision immediately. The ground convoy would proceed to the target building as planned, pick up the assault teams and prisoners, then divert to the Super 61 crash site. Additional quick reaction force elements would prepare to reinforce if needed. But the crash had occurred in the middle of Mogadishu's most hostile neighborhood. Thousands of Somali fighters, alerted by the explosion and seeing the smoke, began converging on the site. They understood that the Americans would come for their downed helicopter, that this was an opportunity to trap and kill American soldiers in significant numbers. Staff Sergeant Matt Eversman and his Chalk 4 Rangers had established their blocking position 1 block north of the target building when Super 61 went down. The crash site was approximately 4 blocks northwest of their position. Eversman received orders immediately, move to the crash site, secure it, and establish a defensive perimeter. Eversman led his 12 Rangers through Mogadishu's narrow streets toward the rising smoke. The city's layout was a maze of alleyways, courtyards, and buildings that provided countless firing positions for defenders. The Rangers moved in tactical formation, weapons at the ready, scanning windows and rooftops. The volume of fire increased dramatically as they approached the crash site. A K-47 rounds snapped past them. RPG trails streaked down streets. The Somalis were not just shooting randomly. They were conducting organized ambushes, using the urban terrain expertly. Private First Class Todd Blackburn, 18 years old from Pensacola, Florida, had been injured during the initial insertion when he fell approximately 70 feet while fast roping from his helicopter. He was now being carried by other Rangers, adding to the difficulty of the movement. Specialist John Stebbins, 24, from Seaside, California, took a round through the leg but continued moving. Eversman's Chalk reached the Super 61 crash site at approximately 15:55 hours. The scene was apocalyptic. The helicopter's wreckage blocked the entire width of the narrow street. Wolcott and Briley were clearly dead, still in their seats in the crushed cockpit. The crew chiefs were injured but alive. Somali civilians and militia fighters were already approaching from all directions. The Rangers established a hasty defensive perimeter, taking positions in buildings surrounding the crash site. They fired at any Somali carrying a weapon, trying to keep the growing crowd at bay. But the Somalis kept coming, using the maze of alleyways to approach from unexpected directions. Additional Ranger Chalks fought their way to the crash site over the next 15 minutes. By 16:10 hours, approximately 40 Rangers had consolidated around Super 61's wreckage. They held a perimeter perhaps 75 meters in diameter, with Somali fighters occupying buildings and positions on all sides. The ground convoy, meanwhile, had picked up the Delta operators and prisoners from the target building and was attempting to reach the crash site. Lieutenant Colonel Danny McKnight led the convoy through streets that were becoming more dangerous by the minute. The Somalis had erected barricades, burning tires, disabled vehicles, debris, to channel the American vehicles into kill zones. At the first major barricade, the convoy came under intense fire. RPGs struck Humvees, wounding soldiers and disabling vehicles. Sergeant First Class Paul Howe, a Delta operator riding in one of the lead Humvees, later described the ambush as a wall of bullets. The Somalis fired from windows, rooftops, alleyways, sometimes from ranges of just a few meters. The convoy fought through the first barricade but took casualties. Specialist Jim Smith was shot in the chest and killed. Sergeant Dominic Pilla was shot in the head and killed. Specialist Richard Alphabet Kowalewski took shrapnel wounds. The convoy continued moving, trying to navigate Mogadishu's confusing streets toward the crash site. But the city's layout confounded them. Streets that looked like they should lead to the crash site turned out to be dead ends or circled back on themselves. Barricades forced detours. Somali fire forced route changes. The convoy commander attempted to follow directions from helicopters overhead, but radio communication was difficult amid the noise of battle. At 16:20 hours, 40 minutes after Super 61 crashed, a second RPG struck a second helicopter. Chief Warrant Officer Michael Durant was piloting Super 64 in its assigned orbit pattern when a rocket-propelled grenade struck his aircraft's tail rotor assembly. Like Wolcott before him, Durant felt the helicopter begin spinning uncontrollably. Unlike Wolcott, Durant had altitude and forward airspeed, giving him slightly more options. Durant transmitted "going down" on the radio, then focused entirely on managing the descent. His co-pilot, Raymond Frank, called out altitude and airspeed while attempting to help control the spinning aircraft. The crew chiefs in back, Staff Sergeant William Cleveland and Staff Sergeant Thomas Field, braced for impact. Super 64 crashed approximately 1.5 kilometers south-southwest of the Super 61 crash site, in an area even deeper into hostile territory. The helicopter hit the ground hard, the impact breaking the aircraft into pieces. The main fuselage remained relatively intact, but the tail booms separated completely. Chief Warrant Officer Raymond Frank died on impact. Staff Sergeant William Cleveland, one of the crew chiefs, also died in the crash. Staff Sergeant Thomas Field survived but was gravely wounded. Chief Warrant Officer Michael Durant survived with a broken back, broken leg, and other injuries. He was conscious but barely able to move. Durant pulled himself from the wreckage and retrieved his MP5 submachine gun. Through the shock and pain, he understood his situation perfectly. He was alone in hostile territory with thousands of enemy fighters converging on his position. The nearest American forces were more than a kilometer away, themselves pinned down and fighting for survival. In the Joint Operations Center, Major General Garrison now faced a nightmare scenario. 2 helicopters down, multiple American casualties, 1 ground convoy lost in Mogadishu streets, unable to reach either crash site, Rangers pinned down around Super 61, and now Super 64, even deeper in enemy territory, with at least 1 survivor. Master Sergeant Gary Gordon and Sergeant First Class Randy Schuchart had been providing sniper overwatch from their helicopter when Super 64 crashed. From their position, they could see Somali militia fighters moving toward the downed helicopter. They could see Durant and the wounded crew chief attempting to defend themselves with small arms. They understood that unless someone reached that crash site immediately, everyone there would be killed or captured. Gordon and Schuchart requested permission to be inserted at the Super 64 crash site. The request was denied. Command understood that inserting 2 men into that situation was almost certainly a death sentence. The crash site was surrounded by hundreds, perhaps thousands of hostile fighters. The nearest American ground forces were pinned down more than a kilometer away. No rescue was immediately available. Gordon requested again. Denied again. Schuchart requested a 3rd time. The commanders in the helicopters and the Joint Operations Center understood what these men were offering to do. They were volunteering to be inserted into a situation with no reasonable hope of extraction, to defend a crash site they could not possibly hold, against odds that could not possibly be overcome. On the 3rd request, permission was granted. At approximately 1640 hours, Gordon and Schuchart were inserted by helicopter approximately 100 meters from the Super 64 crash site. The helicopter could not land directly at the crash due to the hostile fire, so the 2 Delta operators fast-roped into the street and moved toward the downed Black Hawk on foot. What happened over the next hour can only be partially reconstructed. No American witnesses survived to provide complete accounts. Somali witnesses provided fragmentary, sometimes contradictory descriptions. Physical evidence at the scene told part of the story. Gordon and Schuchart reached the crash site and immediately began defending it. They pulled Durant and the wounded crew chief from the wreckage and established a defensive position using the helicopter's bulk as cover. They engaged approaching Somalis with precision fire, their rifles designed for accuracy at ranges beyond what the Somalis' AK-47s could match. For perhaps 30 to 45 minutes they held. Somali fighters attempting to approach the helicopter were shot down. The volume of incoming fire was immense, hundreds of fighters firing from all directions. But Gordon and Schuchart were among the most skilled soldiers in the American military, and they made every shot count. Eventually, inevitably, the odds overcame skill. Randy Schuchart was killed first, shot multiple times while defending the perimeter. Gary Gordon continued fighting alone, protecting Durant and the wounded crew chief, until he too was shot and killed. When their bodies were later recovered, examination revealed that both men had expended all their ammunition. They had fought until they had nothing left to fight with, then fought hand-to-hand, then died. Their sacrifice bought time for Michael Durant. When the Somali fighters finally overran the position, Durant was captured alive rather than killed. The wounded crew chief, Thomas Field, was shot and killed by the Somalis. Durant was dragged from the helicopter, beaten and taken prisoner. For their actions at the Super 64 crash site, Master Sergeant Gary Gordon and Sergeant First Class Randy Schuchart would be posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor, the first soldiers to receive America's highest decoration for valor since the Vietnam War. By 1700 hours on October 3rd, the tactical situation had deteriorated into chaos. Approximately 99 American soldiers were pinned down at or near the Super 61 crash site, surrounded by thousands of Somali fighters. The ground convoy had been unable to reach them and had taken so many casualties that it was ordered to return to base. Super 64's crash site was in enemy hands, with Durant captured and the other crew members dead. Major General Garrison faced a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He could not extract his forces with the available helicopters. The volume of ground fire made helicopter insertions impossible. The ground convoy had proven unable to navigate Mogadishu's streets while under fire. His men were trapped in the heart of enemy territory with night approaching. The solution required a massive rescue force, armored vehicles, hundreds of soldiers, and international cooperation. Garrison requested help from the United Nations forces in Mogadishu. The 10th Mountain Division, a conventional army unit assigned to UN command, prepared a relief column. Pakistani peacekeepers provided tanks. Malaysian forces provided armored personnel carriers. But assembling this force took time. The vehicles had to be located, fueled, armed, and organized. Pakistani tank crews had to be briefed on American positions. Malaysian drivers had to be given routes. Infantry from the 10th Mountain Division had to load equipment and prepare to fight their way into the city. While these preparations proceeded, the men at the Super 61 crash site fought for survival. The defensive perimeter centered on the crashed helicopter, with Rangers and Delta operators occupying buildings on all four sides of the intersection. Staff Sergeant Matt Eversman's position held the north. Other chalks held east, west, and south. The Somalis attacked continuously. Small groups would rush the perimeter from an alleyway, fire RPGs and AK-47s, then withdraw before American return fire could hit them. Snipers fired from windows hundreds of meters away. Somali fighters infiltrated through buildings, appearing suddenly in unexpected locations. The Americans returned fire with disciplined accuracy, but ammunition was becoming a concern. Each Ranger had started the mission with approximately 300 rounds. By nightfall, many were running low. Delta operators who had brought more ammunition redistributed what they could spare. Ammunition from casualties was collected and redistributed. The wounded presented another crisis. By sunset, approximately 12 Americans at the crash site had been wounded seriously enough to require immediate medical attention. The Rangers' medic, Sergeant First Class Kurt Schmid, moved constantly between positions, treating wounds under fire. He had limited supplies, pressure bandages, morphine, IV fluids, and an overwhelming number of patients. Private First Class Todd Blackburn, injured during the initial insertion, required constant care. Corporal Jamie Smith, shot in the femoral artery, bled out despite desperate efforts to save him. Sergeant Lorenzo Ruiz was shot in the hip and shoulder. Specialist John Stebbins continued fighting despite his leg wound. The list of wounded grew longer as the afternoon stretched into evening. Water became critical as temperatures remained in the 90s. Many soldiers had brought only 1 or 2 canteens, expecting a 30-minute operation. By nightfall, men were desperately thirsty, and some were showing signs of heat exhaustion on top of their combat injuries. The Somali tactics evolved as night approached. They had learned that massed charges against prepared American positions resulted in heavy casualties. Instead, they began using the urban terrain more effectively, infiltrating through buildings, firing from concealed positions, then withdrawing before American return fire could locate them. The psychological pressure was intense. Every shadow could be an enemy fighter. Every sound could indicate an attack. The Americans were exhausted, thirsty, running low on ammunition, and increasingly aware that no rescue was coming quickly. Some prayed. Some wrote letters they didn't expect to survive to send. Most simply focused on the immediate task of staying alive for the next minute, the next hour. Lieutenant Colonel Danny McKnight's ground convoy had returned to base by 1800 hours after multiple failed attempts to reach the crash site. The convoy had taken devastating casualties, 2 killed, multiple wounded, and several vehicles destroyed or disabled. McKnight was bleeding from shrapnel wounds but refused evacuation. His report to Garrison confirmed what the commander already knew. The original rescue plan had failed completely. The convoy's experience illustrated the effectiveness of Somali tactics. The militia fighters had channeled the American vehicles into prepared kill zones using barricades and obstacles. They had attacked from all sides simultaneously, overwhelming the convoy's ability to defend itself. They had targeted vehicle tires and windows, disabling vehicles without necessarily destroying them. Most devastatingly, they had demonstrated intimate knowledge of Mogadishu's layout, using the city's geography as a weapon. The Americans had superior weapons, training, and technology. But in the dense urban terrain of Mogadishu, these advantages diminished. A well-trained ranger with night vision equipment and a laser-aimed rifle was only marginally more effective than a teenage Somali with an AK-47 when fighting in a maze of alleyways at ranges of 10 meters. At the airport, the rescue force finally assembled around 7 p.m. 4 Pakistani tanks led the column, American-made M48 Patton tanks provided to Pakistan decades earlier. Behind them came Malaysian Condor armored personnel carriers, each capable of carrying a dozen soldiers. American troops from the 10th Mountain Division loaded into the APCS, along with some Rangers who had remained at the base. The plan was straightforward. Drive to the Super 61 crash site, load the trapped Americans into the armored vehicles, and extract. But straightforward plans in urban warfare rarely survive contact with reality. The rescue column departed the airport at 23:30 hours, more than 7 hours after Super 61 had crashed. The delay had been unavoidable but costly. The trapped Americans had been fighting continuously for 7 hours. They were exhausted, low on ammunition, and suffering from casualties they couldn't properly treat. The column immediately came under fire. RPGs struck the Pakistani tanks, causing no significant damage but showering nearby troops with shrapnel. A K-47 fire rattled off the Condor's armor. Somali fighters, emboldened by darkness, attacked more aggressively than they had during daylight. The column's progress was agonizingly slow. The Pakistani tank commanders, unfamiliar with Mogadishu's streets and concerned about ambushes, moved cautiously. The Malaysian drivers, nervous about getting separated in the darkness, maintained close spacing that made the column vulnerable to area weapons. American infantry, riding exposed in the Condors, took casualties from the constant fire, but the column continued moving forward, fighting through each ambush, navigating around obstacles, guided by radio directions from helicopters overhead that had infrared capability to see in the darkness. At 1:55 hours on October 4th, more than 10 hours after Super 61 had crashed, the lead Pakistani tanks reached the crash site perimeter. The Americans trapped there heard the diesel engines and saw the massive vehicles pushing through the darkness. The relief was overwhelming. Loading took approximately 30 minutes. The wounded went first, carried to the Condors by Rangers and Delta operators who had been protecting them all night. Then the less seriously wounded. Then those who could walk. Finally, the security teams collapsed their perimeter and loaded up. The crash site was evacuated completely. Super 61's wreckage was too damaged to recover, but all sensitive equipment was destroyed or removed. Most critically, all American bodies were recovered. Cliff Wolcott and Donovan Briley were brought out. Every other American who had died at the crash site came out. The return journey to the airport took another 2 hours. The column moved slowly, still under fire, still taking casualties. When they finally reached the airport at approximately 5:30 hours on October 4th, the Americans had been in combat for more than 14 hours. The final accounting was devastating. 18 Americans had been killed. Cliff Wolcott, Donovan Briley, Raymond Frank, William Cleveland, Thomas Field, Gary Gordon, Randy Shugart, Dominic Pilla, James Martin, James Smith, Lorenzo Ruiz, James Cavaco, Richard Kowalewski, Matthew Rierson, Earl Fillmore Jr., Daniel Bush, James Joyce, and Casey Joyce. 73 Americans had been wounded. Michael Durant was a prisoner. On October 4th, as the wounded were being treated and the dead prepared for return to the United States, Somali militia fighters dragged American bodies through Mogadishu's streets. Somali civilians, many of whom had lost family members to American fire, beat the corpses. The scenes were captured on video and broadcast worldwide. The images shocked America. The sight of dead American soldiers being desecrated provoked outrage and horror. This was supposed to be a humanitarian mission. These were supposed to be limited operations targeting specific criminals. Instead, American soldiers were dying in third world streets, their bodies treated with barbaric contempt. Michael Durant appeared on Somali television on October 5th. His face was bruised and swollen from the beating he had received after capture. He answered questions from his captors in a video that was clearly made under duress. His survival was uncertain, his condition unknown, his location unconfirmed. President Bill Clinton faced a political crisis. The Somali operation, which had begun as humanitarian relief, had become a military disaster. 18 dead Americans, 73 wounded, 1 captured, all in pursuit of a warlord who remained free. The American public demanded answers and action. On October 7th, President Clinton announced that all American troops would withdraw from Somalia by March 31st, 1994. The mission was ending. The effort to capture Aidid was abandoned. the attempt to establish stability in Somalia was terminated. American forces would leave, and Somalia's civil war would continue without international intervention. The decision had immediate and long-lasting consequences. Mohamed Farrah Aidid, the warlord who had been the target of the entire operation, remained free and in power. He would eventually be elected president of Somalia in 1995 by his faction, though the government controlled little territory beyond parts of Mogadishu. On August 1, 1996, Aidid was shot during fighting between rival militias. He died of his wounds on August 2nd. His son, Mohamed Farrah Aidid, who had been a U.S. Marine serving in Somalia during Operation Restore Hope, succeeded him as leader of his faction. Michael Durant was held captive for 11 days. His location was kept secret, and he was moved frequently to prevent rescue attempts. On October 14, 1993, through negotiations facilitated by the International Red Cross and former U.S. Ambassador to Somalia, Robert Oakley, Durant was released. He was flown to Germany for medical treatment, then returned to the United States. Durant's injuries required extensive rehabilitation. His broken back and broken leg healed, but he would carry the physical and psychological scars of his captivity for the rest of his life. He eventually returned to flight status and continued serving in the 161st Special Operations Aviation Regiment until his retirement. He wrote a book, In the Company of Heroes, published in 2003, which provided his first-hand account of the battle and his captivity. The bodies of the 18 killed Americans were returned to the United States with full military honors. Each funeral was a reminder of the cost of military operations and the sacrifices made by those who serve. The families of the dead received visits from senior officers, condolences from the president, and flags folded with military precision. But no official recognition could fill the void left by sons, husbands, and fathers who would never come home. Master Sergeant Gary Gordon and Sergeant First Class Randy Shughart were posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor on May 23, 1994, in a ceremony at the White House. President Clinton presented the medals to their widows, Carmen Gordon and Stephanie Shughart. The citations accompanying the awards described their voluntary insertion into the Super 64 crash site, their defense of Michael Durant and the wounded crew, and their deaths while fighting overwhelming enemy forces. Gordon's citation read in part, Master Sergeant Gordon's extraordinary heroism and devotion to duty were in keeping with the highest standards of military service and reflect great credit upon him, his unit, and the United States Army. Shughart's citation similarly stated, Sergeant First Class Shughart's extraordinary heroism and devotion to duty were in keeping with the highest standards of military service and reflect great credit upon him, his unit, and the United States Army. Both men became icons of selfless service and the warrior ethos that defines America's Special Operations Forces. Their decision to insert at the Super 64 crash site, knowing they would almost certainly die, exemplified the principle that no American would be left behind, regardless of the cost. The Battle of Mogadishu became known as Black Hawk Down after journalist Mark Bowden published a book with that title in 1999. Bowden had spent years researching the battle, interviewing survivors, examining military records, and reconstructing the events in minute detail. His book became a bestseller and was adapted into a film directed by Ridley Scott and released in 2001. The film brought the battle to a global audience, dramatizing the chaos, violence, and heroism of October 3rd to 4th, 1993. While some participants criticized certain aspects of the film's portrayal, most acknowledged that it captured the essential nature of the experience. American soldiers fighting desperately to survive in hostile urban terrain while adhering to the principle that every American would be brought home, living or dead. The tactical and strategic lessons from the Battle of Mogadishu influenced American military operations for decades. At the tactical level, the battle demonstrated the vulnerability of helicopters to ground fire in urban environments. The loss of 2 Black Hawks to simple RPG fire, weapons that cost perhaps $500 each, destroying aircraft worth millions, highlighted the asymmetric nature of modern warfare. The battle also revealed deficiencies in equipment and preparation. American forces had requested AC-130 gunships and armored vehicles, but were denied both due to political concerns about appearing too aggressive. The quick reaction force that could have reinforced the trapped Rangers within minutes had been removed from Somalia weeks before the operation due to cost and political pressure. Most significantly, the battle demonstrated that special operations forces, no matter how skilled, cannot overcome poor strategic context. Task Force Rangers operators were among the most elite soldiers in the world, but they were conducting operations in an environment where the local population was hostile, where the enemy could blend into the civilian population, and where the strategic objective, capturing warlords to promote political reconciliation, was probably unachievable through military means alone. The strategic impact extended far beyond Somalia. The Battle of Mogadishu created what became known as Black Hawk Down syndrome in American foreign policy. The images of dead American soldiers being dragged through Mogadishu streets created intense public opposition to military interventions in complex civil conflicts. This reluctance to commit American forces would have devastating consequences. In April 1994, just 6 months after the Battle of Mogadishu, genocide began in Rwanda. Hutu militias systematically murdered approximately 800,000 Tutsis and moderate Hutus over 100 days. The international community, led by the United States, refused to intervene. The Clinton administration, still reeling from Somalia, decided that American forces would not be committed to another African conflict without clear national interests at stake and a high probability of success. Lieutenant General Romeo Dallaire, commander of the small UN peacekeeping force in Rwanda, later testified that a force of 5,000 properly equipped troops could have prevented much of the genocide. The troops were never sent. The Rwandan genocide proceeded largely unimpeded by international intervention. The decision not to intervene was directly influenced by Somalia and the political costs of American casualties. The lesson policymakers drew from Somalia was that American forces should not be committed to humanitarian interventions or nation-building efforts in failed states. Military force should be used only when vital national interests were at stake, when objectives were clear and achievable, and when there was strong domestic political support. This doctrine would influence American foreign policy throughout the 1990s and into the 21st century. For the soldiers who fought in Mogadishu, the aftermath was complex and varied. Some, like Michael Durant, eventually returned to military service. Others left the military, carrying physical and psychological wounds that would affect them for the rest of their lives. Many struggled with post-traumatic stress, haunted by memories of combat, the deaths of friends, and the moral complexities of fighting in an urban environment where distinguishing enemy combatants from civilians was often impossible. Staff Sergeant Matt Eversman, whose leadership at the Super 61 crash site had been exemplary, left the Army in 1996. He became a teacher and motivational speaker, often discussing leadership, duty, and the experiences of October 3rd to 4th, 1993. In interviews, he emphasized the brotherhood that developed among the men who fought together and the lifelong bonds forged in combat. The 10th Mountain Division soldiers who had driven into Mogadishu in the rescue column received less public recognition than the Rangers and Delta operators, but their contribution was equally critical. Without their willingness to fight their way into the city in Pakistani tanks and Malaysian APCs, the Americans trapped at the Super 61 crash site would likely have been overrun during the night. Several 10th Mountain soldiers were wounded during the rescue operation, and their actions deserved recognition alongside the more celebrated Special Operations Forces. The lessons of Mogadishu extended to equipment and doctrine. The U.S. military began developing better urban warfare tactics, recognizing that future conflicts would increasingly occur in cities rather than open battlefields. Training for urban operations became more sophisticated, with elaborate mock cities constructed at bases like Fort Polk, Louisiana, where soldiers could practice room clearing, checkpoint operations, and combat in dense terrain. Helicopter survivability received new attention. The Black Hawk fleet was gradually upgraded with better defensive systems, though the fundamental vulnerability of helicopters to ground fire in urban environments remained. The military experimented with various technologies, infrared countermeasures, radar warning receivers, enhanced armor. But the basic problem persisted. Helicopters are large, relatively slow targets when operating at low altitudes in cities. The quick reaction force concept was reinforced. After Mogadishu, military planners ensured that forces conducting operations in hostile territory always had armored vehicles, artillery support, and reinforcements immediately available. The decision to remove the AC-130 gunships and reduce armored assets in Somalia before October 3rd was recognized as a critical mistake that would not be repeated. The Battle of Mogadishu also influenced how the media covered military operations. The images of American bodies being desecrated and Durant's televised captivity demonstrated that modern warfare occurred in the glare of global media attention. Military operations could no longer be conducted without considering how combat footage would play on television and how casualties would affect domestic political support. This media dimension became increasingly important in subsequent conflicts. For the Somali people, the battle's aftermath was tragic. The international community's withdrawal in 1994 left Somalia to continued civil war and state failure. The country fractured into regions controlled by competing warlords and Islamist factions. Somaliland declared independence in the north. Puntland became semi-autonomous. Southern Somalia descended into chaos dominated by warlords and, eventually, by the Islamist group Al-Shabaab. The humanitarian crisis that had prompted intervention in 1992 continued for decades. Somalia remained one of the world's poorest and most dangerous countries. The failure to establish stability after the Battle of Mogadishu demonstrated the difficulty of external intervention in failed states and the limits of military power to create political solutions. The tactical victory that Somali Militia forces achieved on October 3rd to 4th, 1993 did not translate into strategic success. Mohamed Farrah Aidid never established effective control over Somalia. His death in 1996 sparked renewed fighting over succession. The country's suffering continued, arguably worsened by the absence of any functioning government or international support. In 2013, 20 years after the battle, several veterans returned to the United States to participate in commemorative events. Michael Durant, Matt Eversman, and others who had fought in Mogadishu gathered to remember the dead, support each other, and reflect on what the battle meant. For many, the anniversary provided an opportunity to process experiences they had carried for 2 decades. The consensus among veterans was complex. They took pride in their performance under impossible circumstances. They had fought with courage and skill. They had adhered to the principle of bringing everyone home, even at tremendous cost. But they also recognized that the operation had failed in its strategic objectives, that their sacrifices had not created lasting positive change in Somalia, and that the political aftermath had prevented American intervention in future humanitarian crises where it might have made a difference. The families of the 18 killed Americans carried a different burden. For them, October 3rd would forever mark the day they received news that would change their lives forever. Carmen Gordon, Gary Gordon's widow, became an advocate for military families and Gold Star families, those who had lost loved ones in service. Stephanie Shugart, Randy Shugart's widow, similarly worked to honor her husband's memory while raising their children alone. The children of those killed grew up with fathers they barely remembered or never knew. They attended schools where other children's fathers came to career days and sporting events. They celebrated graduations and weddings and had children of their own without their fathers present. The cost of the Battle of Mogadishu extended across generations. Fort Benning, Georgia, home of the 75th Ranger Regiment, established a memorial for the Rangers killed in Mogadishu. Fort Bragg, North Carolina, home of Delta Force, created its own memorial for the operators killed in action. The 161st Special Operations Aviation Regiment honored its fallen pilots with plaques and ceremonies. These memorials ensured that the sacrifice of October 3rd to 4th, 1993 would not be forgotten. The tactical lessons from Mogadishu influenced operations in Afghanistan and Iraq in the 2001 to 2021 period. American forces conducting urban operations in Fallujah, Ramadi, Baghdad, and Kandahar applied lessons learned in Mogadishu about the importance of armored vehicles, the value of overwhelming firepower, and the necessity of detailed planning for contingencies. The phrase "Black Hawk Down" became shorthand in military planning for worst-case scenarios. What happens when a helicopter crashes, when the enemy is stronger than anticipated, when the situation deteriorates beyond the original plan? But the strategic lesson that military force alone cannot solve complex political problems in failed states proved harder to apply. The United States would spend 20 years in Afghanistan and 8 years in Iraq, attempting nation-building and counterinsurgency operations that faced many of the same fundamental challenges as Somalia, distinguishing enemy combatants from civilians, winning popular support in hostile environments, and creating stable political institutions where none had existed. In the end, the Battle of Mogadishu stands as a defining moment in post-Cold War American military history. It demonstrated the extraordinary courage and skill of American Special Operations Forces. It revealed the tactical challenges of urban warfare and the vulnerability of even advanced military forces in cities. It showed that political constraints and limited resources can undermine military operations. and it proved that strategic success requires more than tactical excellence. The 18 Americans who died in Mogadishu were not fighting for territory or resources. They were attempting to capture criminals who were preventing food aid from reaching starving people. When their mission went wrong, they fought to save each other, adhering to the principle that no American would be left behind regardless of the cost. Their sacrifice was real, their courage undeniable, their commitment absolute. Gary Gordon and Randy Schuchart chose to enter a situation they knew would likely kill them to defend fellow soldiers they barely knew. Their decision exemplified the warrior ethos at its finest: selfless service, personal courage, and commitment to others. They are buried in Arlington National Cemetery, their graves visited by thousands who come to honor their sacrifice. Michael Durant survived his captivity and his wounds. He returned to flying and to life, carrying memories that would never fully fade, but eventually finding peace in the knowledge that he had served honorably and survived when many others had not. The soldiers who fought at the Super 61 crash site, who held that defensive perimeter for 15 hours against overwhelming odds, who brought out every American living or dead, proved that training, discipline, and unit cohesion can enable soldiers to accomplish what seems impossible. They were clerks and cooks and infantrymen and pilots, all thrust into combat that exceeded anything they had trained for, and they performed with professional excellence. The Battle of Mogadishu reminds us that warfare is not abstract strategy or policy debate. It is young men fighting and dying in confused circumstances, making split-second decisions with incomplete information, trying to accomplish missions that may be impossible while staying alive and bringing their friends home. It is soldiers doing their duty even when that duty requires sacrificing everything. The graves at Arlington, the memorials at Fort Benning and Fort Bragg, the memories of those who survived, and the legacy of those who died all testify to what happened on October 3rd to 4th, 1993, in Mogadishu, Somalia. It was the longest sustained firefight American soldiers had experienced since Vietnam. It was a tactical disaster and a demonstration of extraordinary heroism. It was a failure that revealed the limits of military power, and a success that proved the strength of the soldiers' commitment to never leave a fallen comrade behind. 20 years later, 50 years later, a century from now, when historians examine American military operations in the late 20th century, the Battle of Mogadishu will stand as a defining engagement, not because it changed the course of wars or determined the fate of nations, but because it revealed something essential about courage, sacrifice, and the bond between soldiers that transcends strategy, policy, and politics. In those Mogadishu streets, American soldiers proved that they would fight for each other to the death, that they would accept any sacrifice to bring home every American, and that they would uphold the warrior's code even when victory was impossible and death was certain. That legacy, forged in the crucible of urban combat on one terrible day in Somalia, endures as a testament to what soldiers at their best can accomplish and what they are willing to sacrifice for each other and for the mission they have sworn to complete.